Tears of the Kingdom uses the concept of hiding in plain sight as a design motif throughout the entire game. A motif basically being a theme or pattern that pops up repeatedly, and hiding in plain sight being the idea of hiding something in a place that's so obvious you wouldn't even think to find it there. For example, imagine we sitting at a table and I tell you that I'm gonna hide $1 from you in this room, and instead of putting a dollar bill in a discrete location, I've just had 4 quarters on the table this whole time. That's the concept of hiding in plain sight. So relating this back to Tears of the Kingdom, the game basically hides things from you by putting them right out in the open. The game also uses your expectations in order to hide some of these things, which we'll talk about later. It expects some players to have a general history with video games, some of us to have played BOTW, and it expects us to take what it's telling you at face value. Now, I will say, I'm not sure how much of this was intentional from the developers. I believe most of it was, but either way, this is just a fun angle I wanted to use to discuss the game, my own personal observations about the game, not an objectively perfect analysis or nothing like that. But alright, let's get into some of the examples, and warning, there are some spoilers, so do what you gotta do. Now, Tears of the Kingdom has these hidden caves you can find throughout the game, but if you pay attention closely, there are these blue rabbits that will straight up just lead you to where the caves are. I remember spending forever trying to find the treasure for the Fierce Deity quest, and I knew the location was clearly around Akala Citadel, but it wasn't until I decided to chase these little blue rabbit things that I actually found the treasure. The location was discreet, but the rabbit was just out in the open and leading me to the treasure without me even realizing it. This is pretty much the game's way of hiding caves in plain sight. Some of the new enemies in this game play on this motif too. For example, they're literally the trees that get up and attack you. And for the most part, they look like every other tree in the game until they get up and start chasing you.
Ow! Ow! Why are you running? Why are you running?
These enemies are literally hiding in the open, and from a player standpoint, what this does is now make something as basic as a tree seem like a threat. And also, I think this is the game's way of trying to encourage you to be more active about paying attention to the environment, even when it seems like nothing's happening. The Stone Talus enemy that's disguised as a bokoblin base also plays into this motif, even if they're a bit easier to spot. Now, in Tears of the Kingdom, there's one particular quest I want to talk about that encapsulates this idea of hiding in plain sight, specifically when it comes to using your expectations against you, and it's the Sahasra Tower quest. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The bird at the tower says he needs mushrooms from the cave to be strong enough to open the door. So I use common sense. I go down and check the cave for mushrooms. I don't see anything. I go a step further and I even ascend into the tower from the cave, try to open the door. I thought I was slick. I'm like, oh, I'm about to open the door from the back, pause. And then I can't even open the door either. I'm weak too. So I'm thinking I need to go back and keep looking for these steroid mushrooms that my boy needs. And I keep looking a little longer. I don't find anything. So I go back into the tower to see if I'm missing something. And then I realize the sticks are literally items. They aren't decoration or set dressing. They are actual equipment. I pick up the sticks and now the door can open. So let's quickly break that down. Why was this basic solution so hard for me to figure out? The game used a concept called misdirection. Misdirection is a technique used in magic where the magician will distract the audience to make them focus on a part of the performance that don't even matter, so that the audience doesn't see how the trick is actually performed. In the case of this quest, the trick was the sticks blocking the door, and the distraction was the bird telling me he needs some steroid mushrooms. That's the reason I didn't even bother to look around for the sticks that were right there in plain sight. Tears of the Kingdom played with my understanding of video games in order to hide the solution to this quest. The game also does something similar with the Lost Woods. They know a lot of us have played Breath of the Wild before, and they know a lot of us are going to try to go through the woods in a similar fashion. But in this game, the Lost Woods will send you back to the entrance no matter what direction you take. The solution was actually to just go underground and get to Korok Forest that way and just skip the Lost Woods entirely. The game used our expectations and our previous experience with Breath of the Wild against us and placed the Lost Woods there to misdirect us. The Gloom Hands in Tears of the Kingdom use this hiding in plain sight motif in an interesting way too. If you defeat a Gloom Hand, it'll transform into Phantom Ganon. I was pretty surprised when this first happened to me, but what makes this more interesting is that when you fight Ganondorf during the final part of the game, some of his attack patterns are similar to Phantom Ganon's. The game was showing you elements of the final boss fight through the Phantom Ganon fights the entire time. As a player now, this made me feel like I was already preparing for the final battle without even realizing it. Now the game's map also uses the plain sight motif through the shrine and light root locations. Every shrine will always have a light root underneath and vice versa. You can get a general sense of where a light root will be just by seeing if you've discovered a shrine in the map above, which is very useful considering how dark the underground area of the game is. If you found shrines in the map above, you can use them as a reference point to see if you can find light roots. The game basically hides light roots in plain sight based on your shrine progress. Memories are also just found on the map by looking at the glyphs. Very easy to find. They aren't obscured through matching picture locations like in Breath of the Wild. The reason I assume this was done is to encourage players to spend more time in the sky parts of the game because it's easier to see the glyphs if you're looking at them from above. Now the final obvious way that the game uses the plain sight theme is through the Master Sword sequence and the main quest of finding Zelda. I'm sure y'all knew I was going to talk about this part. Now through the entire game you see a light dragon, which you just assume is a normal dragon like all the other ones. At least I did. Turns out that this dragon was Zelda the whole time. Most of you know this part already. If not, you can just look up the details, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But what I will say is that this story element of the game is kind of what made me think about this idea of hiding in plain sight and whether it was an intentional choice throughout the game's design, especially with this being the game's biggest narrative reveal. Now, with that said, what do y'all think of this concept of hiding in plain sight? How much of it do you think was intentional, and are there any more examples of it popping up in Tears of the Kingdom? Let me know. It's GK. Peace out.